Welcome back to another episode of The Missions. I'm Stephen Heiner, and with us for this series is Father Tobias Bayer. Hello, Father.
Hello, Stephen.
When we're recording this just a few days back, I would say within 10 days of our trip to France, and that means we've had enough time to get some sleep and to recover. Why don't we start with explaining to our watchers and listeners, what were you expecting before the trip?
A leisurely time.
Surely not.
No, I was expecting to see the beautiful shrines, churches, cathedrals. At the same time, knowing well that you would have me busy with the sermon, mass, confessions, spiritual conference every single day.
Well, I
But it
mean,
was more taxing than
given that Bishop
expected.
Sanborn has already painted me as the slave driver in the film The Ten Commandments, I just have to wear that now. I don't know why I'm in a suit. I should be wearing one of the garbs, and I should have a whip in my hand potentially. But all joking aside, I want to start with that, Father. We had mass every day.
Mm-hmm.
We started our days, or if travel was such, as soon as that travel was done, for example, we came back from Lourdes and we came straight from the train station to the chapel and had mass. I think perhaps what surprised you, it certainly surprised me. We had a large attendance from the French faithful, a lot of whom their comprehension of English is more so in the hearing than in the speaking. And I was treated to it was a treat for me for one of the faithful on our last day there. She was telling you, for example, oh, I really liked what you preached about on Thursday, as if you might remember, or even that we could remember as the native speakers.
I was too tired to
But
remember.
but it was so wonderful that they were taking it in and
Yes.
absorbing it, even though it's not their native language, and that hunger for the faith that even though it's Easter, even though some of the masses were at 7 in the morning in Paris, and that means if you're not in the Paris region, that means you started your travel at 5:30, perhaps with train and buses to get to the chapel at 7 o'clock. We were living 5 minutes from the chapel, so we did not have that commute. So knowing that that sacrifice was there was really edifying. You also heard confessions, obviously not in French, but in the languages that you do know, and
Like, at times it was a little choppy in English, and so they would try, and I would tell them
interrupted.
just say it in French. And then I would try to pick up what they're saying.
And that's a Spanish background help that can help with that you can pick out
Yes,
some
yes,
words and some
yes.
expressions there. So mass every day, and then often spiritual conference later in the day. So
Yes.
for the faithful who don't understand, what's the difference between a sermon and a spiritual conference in the way that you're approaching your subject?
Spiritual conference is very practical. Has to be more, it can be more relaxed, but it's more down to earth, practical that we can do or live, or some interesting historical aspect that we can develop and explain. A sermon has to be more formal in its format and elevated and must treat more of exalted notions of virtue and sanctity. And so there are different formats. And in a spiritual conference, you can be very meaty, down to earth, and explain the different aspects of examples of different holiness. There is certainly, of course, an overlap, but a sermon in itself has to be more, more elevated, more something like that.
And I think probably what's different is you have questions and answers. And it's not normal during a sermon for someone to raise their hand and ask a clarifying question, whereas in a spiritual conference, you even have space for that towards the end. You say, are there any questions? Are there any follow-ups? Or even
Yes.
sometimes if someone has a point to ask, they can ask while you're in the middle of the spiritual conference. It's
Yes,
almost
it's
like a class more than it is a sermon.
right. It's not as rigorous.
And then we had Rosary, of course. So our entire day
Yes.
was bookended by Mass at the beginning, spiritual conference in the evenings. And so whatever we might have been experiencing throughout the day, we were always reminded, what is underlying what we're doing.
Yes, and analyzing the art in the churches and the significance, or praying at a saint's tomb and trying to understand what made him so special, what virtue was most resplendent in him. And so there was always, during the days, the different spiritual aspect of trying to appreciate the Catholic art and the saints. That was very special.
Well, let's start with Paris. This is not only not your first time in Paris, but it was not our first time in Paris. We'd been in Paris together when you were a seminarian. What were your impressions? Was it different for you as a priest? And obviously, you were seeing a lot more this time than you were able to the last time.
Yes, we certainly spent more time in Paris and saw things more this time. Having studied a little bit of French, it was better for me to read, to hear, to comprehend more. And so I think this time around I enjoyed it much more and was spiritually edified much more by understanding. That was great. And this time I was finally able to enter Notre Dame.
Right. Well, and a lot more cheese this time, possibly.
What was the joke that we were cheesed out by the
Yes.
end of it?
By day nine, both but father and another one of the attendees and co-host Alexander Krosik was cheesed out officially. But I mean, after dozens of cheeses throughout the week, and a far more higher level of appreciation, I would hope.
Yes.
So moving on to Lisieux and visiting Saint Therese, share some of your impressions there, Father.
Just a few days before, I had read a second time her Story of a Soul, which is very nice. But what made visiting Lucia so special was seeing that it's just an ordinary little town. And what's shocking was how ordinary it was. Well, not shocking, surprising. You expect something pulled out of a movie, but in this case, it's an ordinary little town in the countryside in today's age. The church is there, the cathedral is there, the confessional she went to was there. That's very nice. Her house was trying to be preserved, but it was special to be there and see it.
I think that was one of the pleasures many of us were able to take advantage of was to walk from the Martin house to the cathedral, knowing that the family did that and knowing that's exactly what they did to go to mass, and you were able to partake of that as well. And seeing this huge basilica in the middle of nowhere, France, down to this 24-year-old remarkable woman who is a great example, and as St. Pius X says, the greatest saint of modern times, and a chance to visit her relics, her body that's there, and to see, as you say, it doesn't have to be something spectacular or special. It can simply just be ordinary, and that reflects back to Saint Therese and her little way,
Hmm.
and being focused on what you're doing in your life. From there, we go on to Reims, as we know in English, Reims, and uh, Champagne, the relics of Saint Remy, and of course the famous cathedral. What did you think, Father?
Everything was very good. The sun was certainly out there. I think someone got sunburned, but the very special aspect of the cathedral there was seeing a stone marked here King Clovis was baptized. That was very nice because it shows how a country, when it's truly Catholic, the country, the government, everyone can build such wonderful, beautiful churches and have a law, a social order, a country, Catholic, ruled with good laws, holy laws. And that was very nice to hear, especially the story of the conversion of Clovis, and from then the Catholic history of France,
To see where a nation was born, in a sense, and in that spot, how special it really is.
and the fact that they still preserve it.
Moving on to Lourdes, that was our longest train trip. It's not close. I think some people should understand France is, I always say, 0.75 Texas. So if you think of three-quarters of the size of Texas, and Texas is not a small state, that's the entire country of France. And Lisieux is in Normandy, and Reims is not far from Paris. But Lourdes is on the Spanish border. It's very far away, and we still managed to do a few things when we got there, Father. We made a very good use of our 24 hours in Lourdes.
Less than 24 hours.
Barely 24 hours.
But we saw a lot. The train ride certainly was long, but it was open for good conversations. And then what made the setting of Lourdes so special was it's a little town in the Pyrenees. And seeing the Pyrenees was very nice. And visiting then the grotto as soon as we arrived almost was also nice to visualize that, oh, here's the grotto and there's some space here. And now they built a church on top, literally on top. That was very nice to see. But that was also had many people, many different tourists and visitors from all over the world, I guess. And so it was kind of interesting to see that at Lucia, there were very few tourists or few pilgrims. And Reims, no, it's very commercial. But at Lourdes, everyone from the whole
Everyone is
world
there for
almost was
one
there.
reason, right? And you have hotels named Virgo Maria or things like that. And we were very fortunate too, Father, that it had there had been a light rain in the morning, it seemed, but it had dried out, and there were goats and sheep that were grazing, and the bells were ringing. And while we were doing stations, it was wonderful. Obviously, stations is not, one could say, a happy devotion. It's a very somber one, but we couldn't help but, think of that. And here you can't ignore your ears, and you're hearing that those lambs and those goats grazing in the background while we were doing stations. And those, I think people know there's really no stations like the stations at Lourdes that people are likely to have done in their life. They're life size statues, and doing stations with life size
Up a steep hill.
up a hill, moving towards a 12th station that's at the top, and then 13th and 14th stations that are down, that gives you that natural order that matches the supernatural spirit of the stations. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you're not doing the stations if you can't have access to that, but it's a reason why so many people do the stations when they're at Lourdes, because they can experience it in a way that they haven't, and they can take those memories back with them when they do stations in the future.
Yes, several of those in the pilgrimage mentioned that that was the highlight,
Hmm.
that it was very special for them to do the Stations of the Cross with a full life size stations up a hill. That was very special.
Hmm. And people toted a lot of water, Lourdes water back,
Oh, yes.
and there were questions there, and I suppose this might be a good time. People might be confused with the idea of holy water and Lourdes water, Father, and understanding that this is water that comes from a place where Our Lady appeared, but it's not sacramental water. It's not water you use to bless things.
No.
And that simply, it's water that's there, and it could be, for example, drunk in devotion. If there's an illness, you could say a prayer to Our Lady of Lourdes. You could water some in your garden. That it's not holy water, but it is water that has in a way been touched by Our Lady.
A miraculous origin.
And so a lot of that water was was brought back from France to the United States to be given to various people. In the
Yes.
nat in the natural, we've been talking about the supernatural order. In the natural order, Father, we alluded to this already: cheese, bread, pastries,
Yes.
hot chocolate. I think one of the attendees was creating a hot chocolate rating system. I think at some point, and I had warned him. I said, if you go to Angelina, you'll be ruined for hot chocolate for the rest of your life. And I think too, though, this, as much as we may joke about it, people should understand that, as is true in any Christian country, those joys came from Christianity. That these developments came as the nation grew up in Christianity, and they developed because Christianity mirrors our Lord's love of variety, and expressing that knowledge, pursuing that knowledge, and hence you get champagne, hence you get hundreds of types of cheese.
Yes, it's the attention to little details, and that translates to the practical life. Oh, we can make this cheese a little different. And it was certainly a great experience to see that in the natural order, and one can always relate it back to the supernatural order, that any little detail I do in any job, in any craftsmanship, in any trinket, or in any prayer has value and is special and is wonderful to see or have. All the different chocolates, all the different souvenirs we brought back, medals and statues of Our Lady from different places. That was nice.
You got to try frog leg, I think,
Yes.
and quail and some of the other glories of the French table. Also, too, Father, I think you managed to get into the Louvre and Sainte Chapelle as well.
Yes.
And this is the challenge: is sometimes the leader of the visit wants people to take some free time for themselves, and instead people like Father use their free time to max out their time in France and went to Louvre and Saint Chapelle. But also, I think too, Father, you might offer some advice and reflection for people on what to do with their free time. That there's There
Well,
should be some kind of balance, but also at the same time, uh, some perhaps chance of, well, I'll sleep later. I only have this chance now, so I'm really going to go for it. There probably has to be a bit of balance there.
true, true. You can always find time to go back to something you saw special or to some special saint or wonderful image or painting or statue and pray there for a little bit and take some time to let it sink in. Yes, that's very good. Or you can go the opposite extreme of wanting to see as much as you can because you're there and you don't know when you're coming back.
Right. Well, I think that has to be the spirit, and that was hammered home throughout the preparations for this event, Father, that the spirit has to be that I will come back. Don't know when that'll be, but if the idea is I will come back, then I won't feel the need to have to see everything this time. That I can mark and say, I'd really like to go and spend more time there next time, or, oh, we didn't get to see this one thing. For example, it was noted we were going through a part of Montmartre, and
Right.
there was a chance to do a portrait, and we said, hey, if you want to come back and do a portrait, and one of the guests did precisely that. They went back and got their portrait done, and I thought it was a very good portrait. And he, as we suggested, bargained for the price that he wanted, and he got what he wanted there. And this isn't it, I suppose. We are not going back to France anytime soon, but the bishop has recently agreed to allow you to go to New Mexico at the end of this year. So the details are not entirely finished, but we'll put a link in the description of this video so that you can take a look at them. But the miraculous staircase of St. Joseph is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. There are some very beautiful old churches there. And also, that time of year, December 31st through the beginning of January, there'll be First Friday and First Saturday. So the spirit of this trip will be start the year out right with some Catholic friends. So it'll be open to all sorts of people. Whereas on the French trip, we told people if you are in a wheelchair or if you have mobility issues, you can't walk the 5 to 10 to 15 miles per day on cobblestones that you would. But there's no such restriction with New Mexico. If you're a young person who's not 18, you're welcome to come. If you're married, if you're single, it doesn't matter. That this trip is really open to everybody, and it'll be the first Friday and first Saturday of the year. So it's a chance for you to welcome the new year. There are indulgence prayers that are said before midnight and after midnight. You'll be able to say that with Catholic friends. Then you'll have Mass, first Mass of the new year with Father, and then first Friday and first Saturday with Father. So it's a chance for you to bring in the new year with Catholic friends and in a Catholic way. So
Are you are you
that's
expecting me to also give a sermon and a conference every single day?
as expected.
All right, all right.
And also, prior to that will be a November trip with Father Saavedra to Mexico City for people who are interested in seeing the Tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So you're either going to be spending time with St. Joseph or with Our Lady for the rest of this year. That those trips are available. Obviously, Mexico City will not be as long. The French trip was 10 days. The Mexico City trip will only be 5 days, but we'll be seeing the Tilma of Our Lady as well as other churches in Mexico City, and potentially do some day trips. And for next year, it hasn't been formalized yet, but it is likely that we will be going to Rome during Easter time, and not with Father Bear, but potentially with Father Desay. But all of these details will be announced in good time. If you'd like to look for further details, you can go to the IHS events website, which will be linked in the description, and you'll have a chance to join Father in the future, perhaps this at the end of this year, beginning of next year in New Mexico. But there'll always be opportunities. So I want to encourage people to not get what the young people call FOMO, the fear of missing out. That if you miss this opportunity, there will be another opportunity. We're hoping to have more of these, and not only with Father Bear, but with other institute clergy, so that they can share the burden of Mass, confession, spiritual conferences.
It's a lot. It takes a lot to so much in such a short time.
And as a final anecdote, Father, you were even stopped in the street to hear somebody's confession.
Yes. Once for confession, another 3 or 4 times for blessings in a restaurant in the street, to just randomly.
Which is astonishing, because we again think of France as this atheistic, anti-clerical state, which in many ways it is. I'm not trying to deny that, but yet at the same time, here you are, and I reflected with people what a grace it must have been for that person to feel the need to ask a priest for confession. So hopefully, he may have sought it out in another way, even though you were not obviously able to hear his confession on the spot for various reasons. But there are moments of grace all around us, and you have maybe more opportunity to observe them than we do.
Yes, I saw spiritual edification both in the Parisian faithful we met at the chapel, in our pilgrimage group, and myself. So I think that it was a success, the France pilgrimage, and I think that the future trips will also spiritually benefit and strengthen many other souls. But was the trip good for you?
I had the least amount of sleep that I've had in many years, but I'm not complaining about that. That's just the reality of helping to organize a trip, is that there are lots of details that have to be worked out. And in fact, this was one of the reasons that these trips have not happened for so long. A very infamous incident happened in '83 with Bishop Sanborn, then Father Sanborn, who was leading a group in the south of France, and people who had not been, I think, probably trained ahead of time for various reasons. This is how France is. Here's what to expect. Here's not what to expect. Importuned Bishop Sanborn, Father Sanborn, for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I think day 3 of the trip, and then Father Sanborn said, "That's it. I'm not going to be." And part of the challenge was Father Father Sanborn was both the organizer and the priest on duty, and that's what this trip avoided. The priest on duty was just doing priestly duties. The priest on duty was not worrying about hotel accommodations, dinner arrangements, train times, train tickets, metro tickets. That when you have a lay organizer who's handling all of that, then the priest is free to just be a priest. And I think if there had been someone assisting Father Sanborn in '83, it might have cut off the lady who'd asked for the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and told her there is no such thing in all of France. At least not in the '80s. These days there might be, just as a gourmet delicacy. French wondering, oh, this is this American dish, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But in any case, that had been a reason why their institute clergy had not been doing trips for many years, because there really was not lay organization. And realistically, that's the main thing that stops clergy from going. It's not as if clergy in their free time think, oh, you know what I should do? I should plan a trip to France or a trip to Rome or a trip to the Holy Land. And so hopefully what IHS events and that team is hoping to accomplish is taking care of that work for the clergy so that it can simply be proposed. And if the clergy look at their calendar and they can say yes, then it can happen. And if they can't, then it can't. But that's how it has to be. If the clergy are responsible for, on top of everything else, organizing a trip, it's never going to happen. You all have too many other things to do. Well, we look forward to hearing about the New Mexico trip later this year. But as always in the mission series, Father, we know that you'll have other mission trips before then. So we'll come back and debrief with you on those trips. As always, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.